In this video I shall assemble the dividing head I built. This will help in understanding the build. This is the worm gear. It is made from a section of M24 by 3 mm pitch threaded rod. The 3 mm pitch is close enough to the pitch of a Module 1 gear, which is pi times the module. It is drilled through so that the shaft can be punched out. At the other end is a taper where it is held by the center. The worm shaft, it passes through the flange mounting bracket to engage the worm. It is a tight fit in the worm to prevent misalignment of the worm and shaft axis when the retaining grub screw is tightened. The index plate fits like so. The thrust bearing is greased and assembled. The plastic seal is placed around the bearing. The angular contact bearing is seated. The bearing seal is seated on the nut spigot and the nut is tightened. The chuck is fitted to the spindle in the same way as on a lathe. Access to the chuck screws is through a hole in the body. This allows me to tighten the screws without having to hold the chuck. The spindle nut is tightened by placing a spacer between it and the body. The nut is fully tightened to seat the bearings. It is then loosened and tightened enough so the spindle turns freely. The rear support is slid in place. With the rear support loose, the DTIs are zeroed and the two retaining screws are tightened. The torque on each screw is adjusted so that the DTI reading remains unchanged. This should hold the rear support square. The 4 grub screws are then tightened to return the DTIs to zero. The spindle key is inserted in its slot and the worm wheel slid in place. spacer and the retaining nut. The worm gear assembly is screwed in place. Followed by the supporting center. The index plate is screwed to the flange. Next, the sector arms. Followed by the sector arms friction spring assembly. Then comes the index crank complete with index pin. Secured in place by a flanged nut. Now let's wind her up. To use, the dividing head is simply secured in the mill vise. The chuck is removed from the dividing head by first aligning each mounting screw with the hole in the body. Two of the screws are removed. The third is first loosened and the dividing head rotated to one side. This screw shall be used to jack the chuck off the backing plate. This is because the spigot on the backing plate has a small taper to ensure correct mating. Once the chuck is off the spigot, the screw is aligned with the hole and removed.